Hi there. Hi there. I'm Amelia Cacciapero. I'm the Director of Artistic and International Programs at TCG. Thank you. We paid them money to do that, I think. Literally, those are probably not our apprentices. Before we get started with our next session, I just wanted to give you a sneak preview of some very exciting news. Thanks to the support of our good friends at the Doris Charitable Foundation, we've been able to renew our Audience Revolution initiative for a second round, which is fabulous. And for those of you who don't know, Audience Revolution really is focused on advancing the most impactful audience engagement and community development models. It is a multi-year program. There are 4 phases: research phase, convening, grant making, and this next round of grant making is going to focus on cohort building, as well as a widespread dissemination of our findings. I had the great pleasure to have recently been in Kansas City hanging out with some very good folks there, and wanted to announce that the convening will be held in Kansas City, which is an incredibly vibrant and robust artistic community, as well as great barbecue. So we're going to be seeing some good art. And I wanted to give a shout out to our friends in Kansas City. Eric Rosen is somewhere back there. Angela Doris, Bunny Kopaken, and who's not here today, but certainly was very helpful. Also is Laura Hall, who's on our national council. But all you folks at Kansas City Rep and that whole community, thank you so much. What you wish for as we invade your city. So unlike our other convenings, there is an application process, and the application form is live now on our website. And certainly if you want more information about any of that, see me, say Kevin Bitterman back there, Dave Fina, Gus, anyone else on our conference staff, and we'll be rolling out more details. Also, more details will be coming out in Teresa's weekly briefing soon. So now, not to take up any more airtime, I wanted to shift over to the next and final panel, Collective Leadership, Theaters Respond to Current Field Conditions, and I want to welcome back Teresa. Come on back.
Thank you, Amelia. Before I get started on describing this next panel discussion, I wanted to mention that Kevin Bitterman on our staff just called to my attention that today is the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I realized that TCG was founded just a few months before the Berlin Wall went up. So it's kind of interesting to me just to think about time and change and thinking about just the evolution of our theater field during that time as well. What we're going to do now is we're taking all of the great discussions that we've had over the past hour about our organizations, and we want to open up the conversation now to talk about field-wide conditions. What are the shared challenges and opportunities that we're all facing that we can address through our collective leadership? We're going to be grounding this discussion in 3 ways. First, there's research that's on your tables. It's been there throughout the weekend. And we're going to be sharing some key pieces of key ideas and key pieces of research from those findings on slides that will be behind you now. Second, we're incredibly fortunate to have a group of thought leaders from the field to provide their perspective on the conditions we're going to discuss. And I'd like to welcome them. So starting with Mr. Ben Cameron, Program Director for the Arts at the Doris Charitable Foundation. We're glad to welcome Ben. Also Barbara Davis. Barbara Davis is over here. She's Chief Operating Officer of the Actors Fund. We're sitting, and I can do this more in order. Vicki Reiss, who is our program director at the Shubert Foundation. Excuse me, Executive Director at the Shubert Foundation. We get another round of applause. Victor Maog, who is Artistic Director of Second Generation Productions. We talked about Barbara. Kelvin Dilkins, who is the General Manager of Two River Theater Company. And Susan Nelson, who is Principal of TDC. We're calling them our first responders because they're going to be helping kick off our discussions. But even though they look like a panel, do not be deceived. They're here to support the conversation in the room. We want this to be an open forum where we hear from everyone. Everybody in this room has experience, has ideas to share. So we'll hear from our first responders, but we also would like to hear from you. And that is the third piece of how we're grounding this discussion. Your own experiences in dealing with them at your theaters. As we move into each condition, a theater leader in the room will kick off the conversation by sharing their personal experiences with the issue. Then we're going to dial up 911 and give our first responders a chance to chime in. Yes. And then we'll open it up to the floor for everyone, anyone who wants to respond in some way yourselves to what you hear. So a few things to think about before we get started. I want us to imagine that Albert Einstein is on our panel that isn't a panel, and he's urging us not to rush too quickly to conclusions, because the conditions we're discussing are big, and we should not be afraid to live in some uncertainty. Let's take the time to truly understand the problem, and at the same time, we do want to hear things that are working at your theaters that might be adapted elsewhere or scaled up to the field as a whole. The second thing to keep in mind is remember that moment where Susan reframed the challenges of communicating with your board into talking about them as opportunities. So from challenges to opportunities. This may be a space to kvetch a little. That's unavoidable in a room full of theater people. But let's keep this as forward-looking and action-oriented as we can. What can we do together to make the changes we want to see? In the words of TCG's vision statement, how can we make a better world for theater and a better world because of theater? So let's move on to our first condition. The tricky dynamics of ticket sales. Isn't that exciting? Okay, while subscription income has fallen over the past 5 years, the past several years have seen small increases. Meanwhile, single ticket income is growing and remains the largest source of earned income for theaters. From membership models to the nuances of dynamic pricing, how are theaters growing their audience when everything is on demand? To kick off this conversation, let's hear from Josh Bortz.
Good morning. I'm Josh Bortz, I'm the Managing Director at Long Wharf Theater. So at New Haven. So at Long Wharf, we've been almost entirely focused on increasing single ticket sales. So some of the things we're doing is trying to find some low-hanging fruit, both with some old school methods, such as using third-party consumer segmentation models to expand our direct mail campaigns, to more new school things, such as using Google Ads and Facebook to micro-target online. We're also really focused on audience development through partnerships. Our biggest one is with New Haven Public Library, where we do programming at the 5 library branches throughout the city of New Haven. And we're also working trying to enhance the audience experience so that those who want to do more than just observe a play can do so. So we have talkbacks after nearly every performance for nearly every play. And then the library actually curates a micro branch for us, so you can check out, anyone in the state of Connecticut can check out a book or return it to their local library branch. And what we're seeing small increments in single ticket sales, but it isn't like increasing in huge ways. And we feel we need to expand our market footprint more rapidly. So I have a series, I guess, of 3 questions for the first responders and for the group at large. What are the success stories in expanding single ticket audiences, perhaps on a more rapid basis? And then are there examples of initiatives that are scalable? Because we're finding we have very effective small programs, but it's hard to get them large enough so that they have a larger impact. And we're having no success increasing our subscription base at all, so we're an anomaly over the past couple of years. So I'd love to hear about who's having success in acquiring new subscribers, what they're doing, and how they're renewing those subscribers.
reframe the question. I think the concentration on the method you're selling as opposed to the relationship you're trying to sell is the wrong metric. If you actually unpack people's data, what we understand is, and we've looked at this in every performing arts group, more people are coming to see your art than ever before. You're just not coming to where you want to see them.
Yeah.
It used to be a subscriber used to fill up your house and would buy 6 or 4 or 3 or whatever your season was, and now they buy 1. So to get to the same amount of sales, you are actually seeing more individuals than you've ever seen in your life. That's a good thing. We just haven't figured out how to capture them in a way that we want to capture them. We haven't figured out a way to make them sticky, because that's really what we seem to want. How do we want to make them sticky with us? And I think reframing the conversation is where I've seen people actually make some progress. They've stepped back and said, what is the relationship we want? How do we want to make them more sticky? And how does that happen? And sometimes it's a conversation about price. Sometimes it's a conversation about it's okay if they only come every 3 or 4 years. That's just fine. What do I want from them? And I think I worry when we think about how do we want to push subscriptions as if it's us and the solution. Underneath it, there's a whole host of things that are going on about your relationship. But the really good news is if you unpack your numbers, more people are coming to see you than you probably think, and probably more people are coming to see you today than they did 15 years ago. It's just they're not coming in the way you want.
If I can expand on that, Mark Bamoon Joseph, who some of you may know at the Edward Wayne Center, actually now said, I don't want to talk about audiences anymore, I want to talk about intentional community design. And he said, what that means for me is sometimes I need that community to be an audience, but sometimes that relationship is I need people at the other end gaming, sometimes I need people dancing with me, sometimes I need something else. But when we talk about audiences and single ticket, it defaults us into a relationship that's only a glimmer more and more of what the total relationship with the public can be. What we're seeing, if you know the study that came out of the Irvine Foundation called Getting In on the Act, if you don't know that, it's on the Irvine website. They actually predict a 5-band spectrum for interacting with the public, of which attendance is only 1 of 5 bands. And every one of those bands has income potential. So thinking expansively about earnings in intentional community design is a different question. And just off to the side, it's always interesting in other industries like the rock and roll touring industry, which some of you may know. The majority of income by rock shows is not the ticket price, it's the merchandising, it's the standing with the Katy Perry poster that you pay $10 to do, it's the t-shirts. That's where the most money comes from on the road now, not on the ticket sales. So when we focus on ticket sales, we may be narrowing inadvertently this conversation. Now, the last thing I'll say is, we all know subscriptions had 3 advantages for you. It was cash flow up front. It allowed you to program risky work in a different kind of way because you had a built-in audience. And I'm not remembering what the third, it was cost-effective to renew the audience because it was a glimmer. If subscriptions are stagnant and going away, rather than beating our head against the wall to grow a finite potential relationship, because frankly, I think subscriptions are at odds with how most of us live now. I used to be able to say, yeah, next February I'll come to see you now. Please, what's my life going to be like next February?
Exactly.
Rather than focusing that way, I think it does call the capitalization question into focus in a different way. What does this mean for your ratio of reserves? How do you think about working capital reserves? How do you think about the structures that will replace what subscriptions used to do for you in that cash flow situation? That's a different conversation, but one presumably you've been having the last 2 days.
I'm Vicki Maog. I think what we have to do is also zoom back a little bit. One of the works that I'm working with now, one of the programs I'm working with now is the New Victory Theater, because we understand when you're dealing with the idea of transaction, it's a one and done deal. And you have to zoom back and go, what is my relationship to the art? Those who participate with it most, those who have that relationship, stay through. And so that's the sort of work that I've been doing in my training programs, in the sorts of nonprofit, even academic work. And it's impacted who comes in there. We've had a Bastille Day event that related to the French mathematician musical that some know wrote. All those other things we start to open up. But more than that, we have to look at the numbers. The numbers are changing. The census, the 2010 census, for Asian Americans specifically, the fastest growing racial group, the largest amount of naturalization over from any other continent. And that means every 4 years we're gaining the electorate, right? 500,000 more voters. And that means also the larger workforce. And that means just like ABC, you want some of that cash, right? And so Nelson and Asubia, where's Nelson? And I just worked on this huge ABC project, a casting project. You know that they're changing the face of television with some of that. And so I think we have to be able to be aware of those numbers. I know I am on my itty bitty tiny but mighty theater company.
So if I can just speak, because we're going through this similar thing right now, and we're analyzing and looking at the analytics of what sales have been over the past 2 years. So we're looking at subscriptions declining, the auto renewal program declining, but we're seeing an increase in our single ticket goals consistently over each show. So we're saying that everyone is changing. So we're actually on the brink now of engaging a consultant, Josh, right now, and we're reaching out to fellow leaders in the field to see who to go with, to actually look at what we're doing, to look at the dynamic pricing that goes with our subscription packages. We're also starting to offer flexible ticket packages, just so people can get those discounts and deals right now, but we're creating incentives, and what we don't want to do is try and trick people into coming into the theater, and that's one thing we can't do. And you know, I often look at this, and we're going through right now, I just saw from our marketing department for people who have lapsed on subscriptions and what we're sending to them. And I just was overwhelmed by this feeling that we just can't be so clingy. Maybe the relationship isn't working, and maybe they're not going to call you back. And I honestly think that you have to look at your organization and what you're offering as also saying, how attractive is your theater right now? And thinking about the variety of offerings that are going around. And no matter how many emails or direct mails you send, they may only be interested in one show. So what else can we do? We have to do a yes and in acknowledging, because some people are used to the subscription model and that's just how they work. But right now we're approaching an audience that is growing in size and is less frequent in the theater because they have other things to do. So I just think we also do need to take a step back and understand what that dynamic relationship is, and that each subscriber is an individual human being made up of a whole different parts that may not fall under your theater just this year.
Okay, can we get a little bit of dialogue going here? I'm just wondering if anybody here in the room. What?
Vicki wants to weigh in.
Oh, okay. Vicki?
Yes. I wanted to just bring up one aspect of this. Obviously, ticket income and audiences and subs, single tickets, etc. It's an enormously complex situation. My colleagues have done a nice job so far of weighing in, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts out there. There is one factor that jumps out at me every single year as we review hundreds of applications, and that is the sad correlation, the sad but true correlation between ticket sales and programming. And I think that this tends to be something that people don't want to talk about, but I am here to tell you that it's discernible, and I've been looking at this for 20 years now, and there is a radical difference in the programming I saw 20 years ago, and then 10 years ago, and 5 years ago. It is, compromises have been made in a very significant way. Now, I completely understand that. I am not criticizing anyone for making those compromises, and one of the things that I have been delighted to see, given our bottom line concern for the perpetuation of the American theater, is that so many of you have done such a wonderful job navigating the changes in the marketplace. You've just done a fabulous job, and these numbers speak to that. The fact that you've been able to compensate with single tickets for subs being on the decline, et cetera, et cetera. But there has been a cost, and that has to do with risk-taking programming, and I just wanted to mention that.
Great, thank you so much. Chris, do you have something to add?
Well, I want to, yes, building on what Ben said, because again, I think we're all pulling back at the total relationships, not just as a ticket buyer or donor, but all the ways we interact with people, and pulling back. And in Washington, D.C., we're pulling back even more, and I'm curious from the community level. In Washington, D.C., before 2008, almost every major theater got a new facility. And with those new facilities, there was a huge expansion of programming. I don't know whether there was a huge expansion in the marketplace. Actually, in DC, the marketplace has grown quite a bit. We have close to 1,500 to 3,000 new people moving in every month. But I don't know that we've grown the market for the arts. I don't know yet. We are, after much work, we finally wrangled to get a community-wide market research. So that, again, not expanding just the relationship within my theater and understanding that. We're now taking all the largest theaters and trying to see what the relationship overall within the community and how those dynamics are, where we're making inroads in the market, where we're not. I'm just curious, any examples of other communities that have been looking at this more collectively, what they found, how they're dealing with that, because I'm excited that we're going to start to kind of make some inroads beyond just our siloed institutions and see what's happening overall. So any input?
And that was Chris Jennings from Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. Rob?
I wanted to talk about ticket prices. Because I think it's sort of the elephant in the room often is. It's not something that we talk about. For quite some time, we've been thinking that the business model is broken for not-for-profit theater because in order to maintain the percentage of sales revenue to total budget that is deemed acceptable by the philanthropic community, we have to have a pricing structure and a programming structure that is biased in a certain direction toward shows that we think will be marketable at those prices. And so that was a theory that we were dealing with and couldn't really test very much. But now technology has enabled us to get some actual data. And maybe it's, it's semi-anecdotal, but actually concrete, because we, in the last few years, with dynamic pricing, we've learned, number one, all the publicity is about raising prices. What we've learned is that when we do a new play or a lesser-known title, and the demand is soft, we lower ticket prices on the website. And there is a spike in demand, a considerable spike in demand, and a considerable spike in the number of bodies who are going to the theater. We just closed a wonderful new play that didn't reach its income goal, but it reached its body goal. And the bodies were great bodies because they were new people to the good one. The second thing we did in our smaller theater, which is devoted to new plays, was to lower the top ticket price from $40 to $25. Immediately, that series sold out for the entire season. The third thing we did in launching our New Stages Festival of New Plays was to decide, you know what, instead of trying to get people to come in for $20 and spending a lot of time on marketing initiatives, let's make it free. And so now we have 24 performances of developmental productions of new plays in a 400-seat theater to which 300 people come every day. So to talk, in my opinion, to not talk about how our industry, how our segment of the performing arts industry has been burdened with this expectation coming out of the commercial theater that the overwhelming majority or the majority of our revenue will come from the box office is a core fundamental problem. And we now see, at least we see, that there's some evidence to that when prices are lower, prices are more accessible. I said to somebody the other day, I'll pay $225 because I'm an old white man to see Paul McCartney, but I won't pay $225 to see some new band, even if it got a great review in the Chicago Tribune, because I just don't know enough about it. That's just consumer behavior 101. So this is something that I hope the philanthropic community will start paying attention to, because I don't think they pay attention to it barely at all. And recognize that if there is a section of our business model that's broken, that's certainly top on the list.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, we have about
Can I just say, as an exercise, actually, I think if you talk to people at the National Theatre in Great Britain and the 10-pound ticket, which has transformed that theater, they basically said, we sat down with the numbers and we said, what would be the total box office at the current scale versus what would be the box office if we played to 95% capacity at 10 pounds a ticket? And they said the hole wasn't as big as we thought. And given that, we went to a corporation and said, all we want you to do is plug the hole. And being able to offer a 10-pound ticket with that sponsorship has transformed them, just as it's transformed, the $25 tickets transformed the Signature Theater. And if you talk to Mixed Blood in Minneapolis, where everything is free for every performance, unless you want to reserve a seat and there's a nominal charge, it's transforming the box office. But it all came out of running the numbers first and realizing that earned income was a less significant factor than the fantasies were.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have Ellen Richards from ACT in San Francisco. We've got a couple minutes left in this segment.
I'm here to speak in defense of subscriptions. I've spent my life filling seats in theaters, but my main goal has been to get subscribers in my theaters, turning single ticket buyers into subscribers, because those subscribers turn into donors. And those donors keep our doors open. So I think that is the prize that we all need to keep our eyes on, and turning in the critical group we need to keep our eyes on are our first and second year subscribers, and doing everything we can to make them return. Getting people in to see one show, they may not like it, but getting somebody in even at a really low price to see 3 shows, you may get their attention with 1 or 2 shows, and they may come back. So keep those subscribers, keep them near and dear to you.
I'm the artistic director of Chance Theater in Anaheim, California. Just want to share a little bit what we do. We're a small theater. We just moved into 150-seat space. Next year we'll have an additional 50-seat space. And years ago, I would go to conferences and I would hear like subscriptions are dead. So we were a small theater. We were just like, okay, let's stop selling subscriptions. And then we're like, oh, that didn't work. So now we have this other program, what we try to do is leverage the experience. So people come for the shows, and we have talkbacks after every performance. We have some kind of engagement process every performance. We try to make it really flexible. They want to exchange their ticket. They can exchange their ticket even as a single ticket buyer. They just have to pay $10. So then what we do with our subscriptions is we leverage that experience. If they want a discount, of course they want to subscribe, that's what they'll do. We only have 2 kinds of subscriptions: preview for the super discount, and then everything else is it's pretty much a flex. But what comes with that is assigned seats, right? So then that's our subscriptions, and that's what people want. That we'll subscribe for is that assigned seat, and we don't let any single ticket buyer have that option in any way, no matter how much they want to pay for it. And then we have members. So since 2005, we've had this $20 membership where they can come, return visits as much as they want, and that's what they get for that membership. $25 a month. For $20 a month. And then of course there's follower bill. And then now we've added super memberships, different levels of memberships that include a donation that's part of that membership, monthly membership price. And then of course gives them things like recognition program. That's how we're trying to engage them.
Thanks, Ann. Okay, we have one more. Oops. Wow, people want to talk about this. I think we're going to take you, Godfrey. We're going to have Trish and then Godfrey, and then we have to move on. And go ahead.
I'm going to be quick. I'm Trish Fantine from Godfrey. I just wanted to piggyback on what Alan was talking about with subscription. We just did a huge research project with TRG. For those of you who don't know the Guthrie, we are one of the new building babies. It doesn't feel like babies anymore because it's 8 years in. We went through a huge attendance growth when we first opened, and I feel lucky to say that we've been able to sustain it, but it keeps me up at night. The sustainability of going from an annual attendance of about 260,000 people a year to an annual attendance of about 400,000, and most of that growth is in single tickets. So when we did this research with TRG, the big thing for me was, how much more can our market bear, because not that many people moved into the Twin Cities in that time frame, and what is the expectation of single tickets versus subscription? And the big aha for us was what they came out of that with was, A, the subscription model is not dead, and B, reinvest in it, just do it differently. So the thing I wanted to just say out loud was to encourage everybody to pay attention to their data, to make sure that you're getting great information about your patrons, and then to use it. And the place that is so unsexy and so valuable is the segmentation. I think the big flip we have to make is to recognize that we need to offer what our patrons tell us they're interested in, and not presume that what subscribers wanted before is what they want now. Some of them still do. I mean, I know you all have them. I want my seat, I'm sitting in my seat, I'm gonna exchange it 72 times, but I still want my seat. Those people still exist. But we also have probably 12 other categories. And just because as subscribers they look different than they did, it's that customization and paying attention to what their buying history tells you and what their engagement history tells you, and getting really diligent and granular about the data that you have, how you use it, and how you talk to your people. So I'm with you, Alan, don't give up on subscription, and it's working for us. The tactics that we've been putting into place about retention, getting people who lost come back, and all of that, it's working. And I'd be happy to put anybody in touch with my marketing director to talk about it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Godfrey.
Just really quickly, Godfrey Simmons from Civic Ensemble, and I'm a sparkler. So one of the things I wanted to just, it's more of a, I don't know if it's a question or just a thought, because I don't have the experience of like kind of running like a multi-million-dollar thing, but I have a 3-year-old, and it was recently kind of told to me that, you know, well, what happens is that, you know, people get to, you know, they go to the theater for a while. Like you and I were having this conversation. So, you know, people go to the theater a while and they have kids and then they drop out for like 15 years, 20 years, and they come back. Why? Why should that be so? Like, is there something, right? So the question that I have is that how do we think about that? I'm thinking about like kind of me, like I want to go to the theater, I'm in the theater, right? And I want to go, so how do we think about using what Trish was talking about in terms of like the people, like how do we think about what our audience, like where the drop off is, and what can we do as full service theaters to actually change that? And I know it costs money, but then there's that foundational thing, then there's the corporations kind of, you know, being able to kind of jump in and say like, oh, you need to figure out like, you know, how daycare or some kind of care for parents who want to kind of go to the theater, or you want to have, you know, special things for, you know, people who are autistic. You know what I mean? Like, there's different, and theaters are doing it, I know. I mean, I'm sure some of them are right here. But that's the thing that really concerns just me, is being a parent of a 3-year-old. So I'm like, I want to see it.
Great news, great news. In many cities in the United States, there are incredible theaters that you can go to with your 3-year-old that will teach them how to be a theater goer so that they have a giant.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next condition. And actually, thank you, Godfrey, for teeing this up. The changing funding environment. I'm going to let you know specifically what the question is. Foundation giving remains the second largest source of contributed income, but Theater Facts 2013 shows a drop in support in the past 5 years, leading to an overall decline in contributed income. Have the priorities of Foundation shifted, and how can we strengthen this essential relationship at this critical time? And we have Yvonne Bell to share her thoughts and get us started off.
Good morning, Yvonne Bell, and I'm the Director of Advancement for Center Theater Group. And in regards to foundations, I have to say that whenever we apply for a foundation grant, we're very thoughtful about it, because we know that we are going to have to deliver on it, and oftentimes those grants are multi-year grants. And Ben, you were saying earlier about the five bands, and ticket sale band being only one of them. And you mentioned the Irvine Foundation. It took us 3 years to apply for that Irvine Foundation grant, because it was very, it asked a lot of the organization, and we knew we had to deliver and be ready. They were asking us in regards to not engaging the audience and having participatory activities so that the audience were theater makers. And we started that. We were awarded a grant after a very competitive proposal process. But then it struck me also as to what Susan was saying yesterday about kind of the core purpose for our organization, because there seems to be this kind of this push and pull as we go out and at our costume shop, which is in East Los Angeles, do hands-on activities with the community is a very different activity than trying to produce successfully and garner audiences on our main stage audiences. So it's interesting to me how, and we look to foundations to kind of guide us of like, okay, we're going to try this. And I just wondered if you could respond to that, and if other people here have had that sort of similar struggle.
First respond, Doris. Ben?
I mean, to the Uber question for a second, what we do know about transit charitable giving are the percentage of the charitable dollar going to the arts has declined over the last decade. A decade ago it was 12.5%, now it's 10% of the dollar goes to the arts, A. B, what we know is the median grant to the arts has not shifted one dime in 21 years. In 1993, the median grant to the arts was $25,000. Last year, the median grant to the arts was $25,000. That's pre-calculating inflation. So the buying power of the grants is significantly eroded over time, number two. Number three, what we know, which is probably in here, 80 cents out of every contributed dollar comes from an individual, not from government, foundations, and corporations split 20 cents out of the dollar. A. To this Uber question, I was thinking about this on Friday on a different panel, and I thought asking foundations about funding is about looking at the money in the rearview mirror of your car. Yeah. It's important money, it's great money, but with the passage of time, we're getting further and further off the bumper. We used to be in the front seat, then we were in the back seat, then we were trailing, now we're getting further behind. Yeah. If I look laterally out my side windows, the current money is from individuals and from joint partnerships from other pots of money. As an example, because we do other fields, we actually help in our music field, in our jazz field, we place musicians at the University of Michigan Medical School to teach doctors in training how to listen differently. That is such a hit that the medical school picks up the whole bill now. Medical schools are hiring ensembles of actors to play patients for student training, etc. That's money coming in from other unexpected pots. And if I'm looking at the future of fundraising to this funding, I have to say, if you're not paying attention to Ice Bucket Challenge, and what I mean by that is three things. Number one is, it's going to change every dime you raise. Because we were all taught that you didn't ask anybody for money until they touched your organization 5 times. Ice Bucket Challenge started with the ask. Those people had no relationship to that cause. Most of them still don't understand what ALS is, but they raised $43 million from 750,000 new donors. Online giving is increasing 250% every year, and even though it's only 6.7%, the Red Cross now raises over $1 billion online every year. So if you're not paying attention to that, and what we've got to pay, and then I'll stop, sorry. What we've got to pay attention to about this is going to change fundraising in 3 ways. Online fundraising teaches you to give small amounts to lots of different causes. So you give $25 to 30 different things. What's that going to do to the big ask? Number 2, online fundraising leads you to believe you can solve cancer for $25. So how's that going to resonate when you say I need $10,000 to put on the plate? And number 3, if you know Kickstarter gives away more money to the arts than the NEA budget, which you should know, what you should also be aware of is for-profit and not-for-profit are indistinguishable in that. Most of that money to the arts Kickstarter goes to rap CDs, independent movies, etc. Now's the time we have to ask, do we care that people understand the difference between a for-profit and not-for-profit? Is that an important distinction or is it not? And if it is, how do we signal that? Do we need a good housekeeping seal on our sign? Or is this actually a chance to rebrand the sector in some way and say, we're the for social good sector and the commercial is the not for social good sector? You know, so all the questions about the future are not only in the mechanism, they're about the subliminal impact of what fundraising online will do to all of your fundraising efforts in terms of the attitudes of the incipient generation.
Vicki, I see you took the mic. Are you wanting to respond?
Yeah, so I'm a little scared.
Oh, Susan.
But I do want to say, I think this also has to do with the size of your organizations. So these statistics are an amalgamation of everybody.
And what we know is people are revenue driven in different ways at different sizes. And so foundations play a significant role in much smaller organizations because of the cost structure. That's some of the stuff we talked about yesterday. Foundations, as you get bigger, are a much less important piece. They are more industry leading than they are thinking, rather than they are revenue drivers. And I think we spend a lot of time mushing around when we're mid to large size thinking about the role of foundations inappropriately. I think at the smaller size, we have to step back and say out loud, it is the lifeblood money. And that is a real discussion, especially for organizations that are facing issues of cultural equity and access to capital. That to me is a much more rich conversation about the role of foundations because those dollars are real and are lifeblood to organizations who are trying to either get into cultural equity, positions where they can access real capital, as opposed to organizations who actually have the power to lift up the individual market and then ditto on everything with crowdfunding. So the only source of new capital is exactly the only source of new capital I have seen in the last 20 years is not debt, it is crowdfunding. It has the potential to totally change your capital because it's not restricted. It has no opinion. It doesn't get to say. It's neutral.
But just to tag, it does prize novelty. There will not be the second annualized bucket challenge, as we know, and so that's a whole different terrain. The other thing I would say about foundations is in the most recent report where they track the equivalent of the, whatever it is, the TCG Theater Facts, the group over 10 years, the 875 largest foundations in America that give to the arts reduced their giving to the arts 8% last year. So in terms of the people that are given the most money, they're pulling back, just to be totally frank.
Can I just ask real quickly, Barbara, is the Actors Fund has funding that is for individual artists and everyone in the theater business, not institutions necessarily. And I wondered if you wanted to say something about that because people are not often aware.
Sure. Yes, I was going to talk a little bit more about it with the next question. But the grants to individuals that we give are really focused on need. So it's, for us, it's really about helping individuals. So I think when we talk about really the state of the artist, we'll go into more of that there. But like what everyone is going through here as a nonprofit, trying to raise its funds both through ticket sales for special performances and things like that, we're finding the exact same challenges. People who used to buy and attend every one of our special performances aren't coming in anymore. They're getting tickets earlier, they're getting tickets for less money, they're getting discounts. So we really had to change in the same way how we are raising funds. And it is so much about developing a relationship to that individual donor, because then they become, as was eloquently said earlier, they become, the individual ticket buyer becomes the donor that helps support the organization as a whole. So we've really seen a shift from just ticket sales to all of our events, whether they be special performances or galas or other things. It's really about creating the relationships and enlarging those relationships in those communities. Vicki, and I just wanted to mention that I certainly agree with everything being said. Sadly, the role that foundations are likely to play going forward, it's been diminished so far and it will be further diminished. But just to the extent that foundations will continue to play a role, and as Susan was speaking about, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about the role they play with smaller organizations. I want to just mention, because I'm a believer in controlling what you can control. And after 20 plus years of doing this, and coming from a background of development, I had been director of development before doing this, I can tell you that I think most people, most of our constituents believe they're doing absolutely everything they can with respect to foundation fundraising, and you're not. There are I's that aren't being dotted, there are T's that aren't being crossed, and just as individuals have become so hugely important with respect to fundraising, there are individuals at foundations as well. And I say this because Our foundation, I am so fortunate to be able to work for a foundation that is fundamentally about keeping this art form alive. It's a joy that I get to do that. That is what we are here for. But most other foundations, 98% of the other foundations that might support theater, are not as fundamentally predisposed. And as such, please review your efforts and make sure that you're really doing everything you can do to properly distinguish yourself and seek funds.
Okay, great. I see Sam over here wanting to say something, and I just want to say, while our first responders are responding, if you do have a thought, an instant thought, and you want to get up and talk, please do, and we'll call on you. Sam.
Yeah, this is awesome. And then talking, my name is Sam, representing Congo Square Theater of Chicago, Illinois, new artist director, and it's such an interesting conversation, and then we're bringing up this idea of equity, as Susan put it, and it's, as a small theater company, I'm curious about foundations and this idea that it's like you know what's coming, you know who's pulling back, you know what the theaters need to be doing, yet as a small theater company, it feels like oftentimes you don't want to support us figuring out how to do it. So you're like, hey, you need to go get all those individuals, you know, you've seen the Ice Bucket Challenge, you should figure something out like that, crowdfunding and all of that. And so I'm like, all right, great. So we got this great crowdfunding idea that we want to do, and we kind of need some help to do it. And then you're like, well, we want to support the programming or the theater or the art or whatever. And you're telling us that we need to do these things to help find the support. So as you can see, I'm confused about just how to find ways to get support for infrastructure so that I can continue to find the support for the individuals and the trustees and the fundraising events and all of these things that you continue to tell me that I should be doing.
Hi, Sophie Tribe from South Detroit Theater. I really want to commend Ben on his comment about the fact that 20% of the, 80% of the money in the country is given by individuals. The one place I see a lot of organizations, and I've been in fundraising as a professional before I retired, is in the area of deferred giving. Dead individuals last year gave 7.2% of all the contributed income to charities in the United States. That's the fact that dead people give more money than corporations. A simple tagline on all your materials saying that giving through your will or trust, contact us, let us know. Having a little society where you just recognize people, put their name in the program. Simple. We're not talking about getting involved with charitable remain trust and you can do that too, but just remember our organization in your will or trust. It's a gold mine.
Great. Ben, did you want to respond to Sam's question?
Yeah, and actually, I've got a new tagline now. Even though you're dead, your love for theater doesn't have to be. Basically, what I would say to your question is two things. Number one, unfortunately, the foundation community is a herd of cats, most of whom have ADD. And so what I mean by that is there is not a uniform answer to addressing the foundation community. Of 50 cats, you'll see 50 different industries. Your primary targets are going to be local foundations. I mean, to your question about the programming, that's exactly what Theater Revolution that we're supporting is trying to do around some of these crowdsourcing and innovative ideas. And so for us, you go to that program because we don't have the capacity to administer theater by theater by theater, so we do it with panels. But ultimately, it's a long-term thing. The one advice I always give people is anytime you go on a fundraising call, spend at least 15 minutes trying to figure out what the funder is thinking about, not what they're doing. Because all what they're doing is what they got through their board 2 years ago. What they're thinking about is what they're getting ready to propose to their boards to go forward, and if you're in front of that trend because you're on top of it, it'll advantage you in the longer term.
Yes.
Pete Miller from Woolly Mammoth. And we, for the last few years, have been quite successful securing new foundation funding, and largely funds that are specifically targeted on innovation. And I just want to make sure that was in the room, because the way that we've done that is not by going out to the grant lists and looking for what is the thing that someone wants to fund. Oh yeah, we could do that. But it has been determining what is something we organically, strategically really want to do, and kind of documenting and making big noises and sending people to talk at conferences about them, and then shopping those to as many, even vaguely possible foundations as possible. And that has shaken loose a surprising amount of money. I guess what I'm saying is that sincerity actually works in at least the innovation grant seeking world. If you're doing something legitimately new that you legitimately believe will move your organization, there's money out there to do that. And that's been a wonderful surprise over the last 5 years for me.
I'm curious about one thing. It's sort of related. For the people in the room who are willing to offer the information, how many of you know for a fact that all of your board members give to your theater? Just show of hands. Okay. And how many of you are 100% sure that all of your staff gives to your theater? Well, just makes a financial contribution outside of their job is what I was asking. I just curious about it.
That's great. Ken, you have
I'm aware throughout my career of the levels of learning with foundation practice, I would say, and I think that when I went to the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, I was desperate for foundation money, so if there was a cause, I pursued it, whether or not it was good necessarily for the theater. Then I realized that's a big mistake, so I pursued causes that I thought were very important to the theater. I think I'm in the third level, which doesn't mean I don't want foundation money, or maybe the fourth level by now. I've realized, particularly in the last 5 years, it took me 20 years to figure this out, that foundation and grant opportunities are really valuable to the organization because it allows us to stop, think, reflect, decide, is this something we want to do, or what do we really want to do? What's the core? And the more you can get the debate out throughout the entire organization, throughout the entire board, it's incredibly useful. And you may not end up applying, but it's that opportunity that we so often want to have with our boards or executive committees or our communities or our audiences or our artists. It allows a forum to do that because everybody will come to a meeting about we've been asked or we have an opportunity to apply for a big grant from a national foundation. Everybody will show up. So I would encourage people to use that as a forum that we've been talking about the rest of the week about the examination of what it is you're really at core trying to do and what target your audience is and your artists are. What do you want, what kind of artists and audiences do you want in your theater?
Thanks, Ken. Lori Baskin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Baskin. I'm Director of Research, Policy, and Collective Action at TCG. And I just want to note, because trustee giving and other individual giving is huge for our theaters and the only area that is growing, I would like to remind you that Congress has been talking for several years now about comprehensive tax reform. The charitable deduction is at risk, and that is the only issue that they're really talking about already addressing in this new Congress. So when you get an action alert that talks about urging you to contact your member of Congress to preserve the charitable deduction in its current form with no floors, caps, or other modifications, please participate. We need your voices to reach your members of Congress. We're depending on the charitable deduction. That is obvious in terms of individual giving, so we need your voices. Thanks.
All right, great message. Steve?
I wanted to say that the shift that we've seen, particularly in foundation giving, and we get a fair number of foundation grants, is that they're willing to give you money to plan your program so that you don't have to create it and apply for it. You can go in and say, we're going to need 6 months to look at what we want to do and really do the research behind it so that when the program gets implemented, we're prepared. And second, a part of that planning is the research that goes behind the project, so that you come out at the other end with real numbers, real research that you can continue to use and leverage as your organization moves forward. It's been a huge shift for us, but it's given us a tremendous amount
of numbers, ammunition, when we go to the individuals to say, we know that the students who are participating in our program are scoring 20% higher on their writing test scores than the students in the control group. It means a tremendous amount of money. They want to help you there. It's great. So thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Steve. Tim.
Yeah, hi, Tim Jennings, Children's Theater Company. So just to follow up on what Lori said, the one thing that I think Minnesota has done very, very well is to figure out how to get money out of the government. And what we ended up doing was the Legacy Amendment, which was a joint partnership with Parks and Water and the hunting folks. All of them really got together with culture, so that it was considered parks, which are part of the heritage of Minnesota, culture and arts. And it's put millions and millions and millions of dollars back into the arts. 50% of all of that money goes to the arts. So I would say, just on a personal level, CTCC is about $600,000 a year of additional funding that's happened since that legacy amendment went through. And that happened because of board members advocating, not arts members advocating. This was something where the boards really got involved. So I would just say, you know, if you're not doing advocacy work at your theaters with your board members, you're missing an opportunity.
Can I tag on that short enough to say there was a great dance company that led the dance field called Trey McIntyre and Company out of Boise, Idaho. The big win they had was they never had an arts agenda, they had a civic agenda, that they were going to transform Boise into the world home of innovation. That was led by the sheriff, the football coach at the University of Idaho, a .com CEO chair, and the managing director of the dance company. They've written a book about their collaboration called Wise Beyond Your Field, which is about cross-sector collaboration, which is a great guide about how to think in this more expansive terrain to common game.
Okay, Josh, we're going to take one more.
Sure. I just want to actually chime in on the public sector because the largest Connecticut theaters, we've had tremendous success. So our funding, while everyone else is applying, all of our funding is doubled from state money. There's a couple things. One is that we're getting smarter about applying to other agencies for money. So for example, Long Wharf, we get money from the State Tourism Commission to go towards marketing because they're trying to encourage intrastate tourism right now. So that's been successful. But probably more significantly is Connecticut has now cut general operating support. They give the money to creative placemaking. And so the six largest theaters in the state, Hartford Stage, Yale Rep, Westport, the O'Neill, Goodspeed, we've gotten together and we now raise money collectively for a state appropriation. We no longer go into the pool, so our funding has gone from $30,000 a year to $80,000 a year, because then we divide the appropriation 6 ways and we split the lobbyist costs. So we have a lobbyist, we share that cost. We have a logo, right, with the whole thing. And two things, I want to emphasize what Tim said, it's because our trustees also really got on board. The other thing that works about the coalition is we have representatives from all over the state, so it's not just a New Haven thing, but it's a New Haven and East Haven and New London and a Hartford thing and a Fairfield County thing. And then also our impact is just more impressive in aggregate. So, if Long Wharf was to talk about our economic impact, it would probably only be about $8 million. But when we talk about all 6 theaters, it's $52 million. That gets the attention of the legislature and the governor. So I just offer that as a way we've been successful.
Hi, Andrew Russell from the Edgemont Theater. Just a word on outside the box creative collaborations. In 2014, our presenting sponsor on our Angels in America project, which included huge shows in Red and a bunch of community projects, was the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, who are pursuing a vaccine for HIV/AIDS. And they were our presenting sponsor. They came in with a very large dollar amount. There were a lot of community partnerships. Our cast went to their labs and saw where hopefully one day there will be a cure. We did a reading of the Normal Heart on campus so that their patrons could track the through line of start to end of the disease. Our actors raised after the show almost $20,000 for the organization. We also have a partnership with Edelman, which is the world's largest PR firm, and we do storytelling workshops, which are very easy for us to do and very hard for them to do. Surprisingly, though they're a PR firm, I hate that this is getting video recorded right now. But those together contributed about $75,000 annually, and for a $1.2 million organization, that's a very big deal, and also deepens the community roots in many ways. One last thing I'll share is yesterday Mariah Kaminsky with the Rep and I were talking about how a non-profit theater, even inherent in the title, is an assumption of no capital, no profit. And so I'm going to advocate to the board that we are either a theater for the public good or a public theater or some other term that doesn't instill in the listener an inferiority complex in the messenger. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to our next condition, and that is the state of the artist. So here's our question. Theaters continue to find new and renewed ways to integrate artists into the lives of their institutions and provide them with greater resources and support. Yet many artists continue to struggle or leave the field altogether. How can we provide a more sustainable existence for theater's most important resource, our artists? And I'm going to ask Larissa Fasthorst to begin the discussion.
Hey, I haven't seen the slides, so I'm trying to finish up really fast here. Wow, okay. So I'll take a moment to absorb. All right. Hey, I'm Larissa Fasthorst. I'm a playwright, choreographer, and I'm also on the board of TCG, which is why I'm here. I don't have a board. This morning I was like, oh, talk to me. So I feel about things. So that's what I'm doing here. So I live in San Monica, California, and I'm really trying to pull together. These things make me so emotional, especially the fall form, which is weird because I'm not, I govern myself, right? And so, but I'm always working with theater professional people to get paid to do this. When I'm here with trustees and board members, it just does me. I get all emotional. You guys don't get paid for this. You paid for it. You paid for my life, and you paid for a pretty amazing life, and through work and money and whatever. And anyway, I just want to give a shout out to trustees and board people because it's so moving that you care so much. So thank you for that. I live in LA, so I'm around a lot of playwrights who used to write plays, that are writing TV, writing film. I'm the little crazy one that's going the other way. I used to write TV, now I write plays because theater's my home, and I love theater. So here's the deal, though. I was really conflicted talking about this because I've been really fortunate to be able to get by in theater, right, and to not have a regular job. I don't have a degree, so I can't teach, so I have to make a living doing what I do. And so I've been really fortunate with that. And so it's hard because so many people, most of us don't. And it's funny because as I was thinking about this, the thing that came up was I'm like, I'm so fortunate, I'm so grateful. But the only reason I can be that is because I'm married to a sculptor who's stupid enough to think, hey, we don't know if we can pay our rent at the end of the year is an okay way to live, And we don't know if we get to pay our health care this month. Maybe we're not, we're going to take it off, that's an okay way to live, And so, and I am grateful for it. I'm grateful I get to do what I do, but it's kind of crazy that's gratitude, and that's puts me kind of at the top % of the field as someone who's making a living as an artist. And that concerns me. And that's why we have all these fantastic playwrights in LA that aren't writing plays. I think, a couple things I want to throw out that was positives that happened to me, just to get you guys thinking about small things you can do. I'm working with Cornerstone Theater Company right now, and they confuse my agents so much. They don't, everything's pay what you can, so there's no royalties, and they have, since I started working with them 2 years ago, 4 times called to renegotiate my contract and give me more money. Because it's so simple. Every time they apply for a grant, they put in some extra money for the playwright. What? And it's not a lot. If they get a big grant, they give me a couple grand, they throw me another couple grand. Sounds like it's really a teeny bit of the whole bucket. It changes my life. It means I do get to pay my health care this month, and I do get to pay my rent. I don't have to call my landlord going, please. And so it's huge, and it's such a, and they call my agent and say, hey, we got more money for you. And I'm so confused by it all, but it's really amazing, and it's small, and they give that money directly to me. It's not dependent on whatever, and at this phase, and at this time, and this draft. Just say, hey, here's a couple grand. And it's changed, it's really life-changing. And I just encourage you that things that aren't that big can be very life-changing to your artists. Another thing that's strangely life-changing, Center Theater Group. I was in their writer's workshop, and they now, Rick Carlo and Joy, every show that they open in their 3 theaters, they have a night, but sometimes it's previews, sometimes it's opening, sometimes it's later, where they invite all the former workshop participants to come for free. That makes a huge difference. I see so much more theater now than I used to because, in October there's $350 worth of fees to get my plays written that I had to pay for. That's a lot of tickets I can't buy. So having a theater just send me the email and say, if you want to come see my play, as opposed to me having to go asking for charity and saying, hey, can I come? I can't afford it. I'm getting all these submission fees this month. You know, it's a huge thing. And for you guys, you know, it fills up your seats with some really enthusiastic people that are going to scream and cheer and laugh. And you know, you got those empty seats you're talking about. Playwrights love to have them, and we love to know what's going on in the field. So those are some positive things that happened. I know a lot of other people, Reiss has had their, you know, healthcare stuff announced this week. I know there's other people doing great things, but there are a lot of concerns. I think some of the big concerns I'm just going to throw out there. Some of us who've been on a panel see a massive divide between what full-time staff is paid and artists who are never staff and are not paid. It's a little frightening that starts to make us feel like a commodity. Someone said this the other day, commodity to increase your equity as opposed to giving me equity, and it's a little upsetting. Commitments, finding ways, I'd love to hear about finding ways to give us a commitment for future. Some people are talking about having to commit to 3 readings next year as opposed to, we'll see, you know, I never know what's happening 6 months from now. That's how I live my life, and it would be really nice to even know 6 months ahead that like a theater's going to commit to me even for that long. It would be great. Space. You guys have space. And you have databases of actors. We need little places to read. I've had theaters say, hey, come on over. Yeah, you can use our space and you can we'll send you our list of actors. That is huge. You don't have to make it a whole thing. It doesn't have to be a foundation and a reading and a workshop. I just need some space to get some people together to hear stuff. So it's not just in my living room. Casting. Oh my God, casting, guys. I could talk about this all day. I can't tell you how many theaters tell me, I love your plays, Larissa, but we can't cast them. And that's the number one thing that's stopping my career right now. So do I have to stop writing about people of my heritage? So let's erase Native American people from the stage. Oh, by the way, Happy Native American Theater Month. It's a national thing. February is not the only month. So do I have to stop writing about Native Americans to get a Native American playwright successful in American theater? Apparently, yes. That sucks. Diversity versus equity. We've been having a big talk about that on the board. I really would love to hear kind of what your steps are between, for myself who tends to end up in the diversity token area, unless I stop writing about Native Americans, and equity. Like they're 2 big things, and I'd love you guys to think about it and hear like how you're pursuing equity with your artists as opposed to just diversity. And finally, I think there's a risk. It's been striking me this week about how much the word risk is put with art, and how when we equate risk with our art, which is why we're here and why y'all have jobs, why that's a negative. And to be honest, I hear again and again from these playwrights writing for TV, and actually from my own newly lured, warning, by a TV manager, because they're like, we want you to take the biggest risk possible. We want an all-Native American cast. We want them on the moon, and we want them, whatever. Like, just their interest in, they see risk as such a positive for me as an artist, and I feel like I'm constantly getting risk as a negative, and I think we've proven that that's not retaining our artists. So what can we do to balance that out? Thanks, guys.
I just want to say that I really appreciate that Larissa raised the topic of equity, and that's something we're going to be able to discuss also in our next condition, which is succession and equity. First responders.
I'll start with this one. Every day at the Actors Fund, what we're thinking about is how to help people in the performing arts stabilize their life. So there are a lot of different factors that we see going into that. But part of what I'd love to get at today is to hear from you also what you think the issues are. We're a national organization, yet we struggle to make sure to try and make our services national with offices in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. What we found is that that what we're trying to do within our offices, with our challenges to make sure we can do them around the country. But the biggest issues that we see day in and day out, I'm going to go through a little bit of the list. Access to affordable health insurance. That is one of the key things that has changed in opportunity in the 20 years almost that we've run a health insurance resource center. now with the Affordable Care Act. There are more options, there are lower cost options, there are many challenges that go along with this, but this is something that should really help many, many people in our field and in our business, and particularly those artists who are not earning health insurance through their work as an artist. So for us, this is one of the most important conversations that we want to be having with you, and we want to be having it around the country. So if you don't know us, if we haven't talked to you about it, or haven't worked with you around how to help people that you work with, make sure that they're insured, please give me a call. But there are a lot of other things that relate to basic needs and stability of life in this business. And those are access to affordable housing, access to mental health services, learning how to manage money. There's a lot of work that we do and that we see in issues with, just what you were talking about when you were talking about being married to a sculptor and being a playwright. People's attitudes about money and where they see themselves changes somewhat over the life cycle, but these are issues that people don't have places often to go to and to talk about, and that by the time you get to be 45, being a starting artist doesn't feel the same as it did when you were 25. So what can we be doing to help empower people to take more control over their lives? Performing arts is the one industry where the conversation around whether or not you have to do sideline work and what that means is an important one. Because for us, we don't just see the sideline work, we see the skill set of people in this industry being so critical, particularly as we go into a future where communication skills are the most important set of skills that we have. And what can people be doing to increase their overall household income, not by giving up their art, but by using it in many different ways. So these basics of housing, access to care, ability to earn money in a variety of ways, entrepreneurship as an artist, these are the things that we're thinking about. But we'd like to hear more from all of you and what you're hoping to learn more about.
Child care, helping people with child care.
Child care and all that goes with child care is a critical thing. A lot of what was being talked about before, I just want to comment on, and our greatest successes, and I think the greatest successes we've seen are based on community partnerships, and child care is certainly one of them. Being able to find or other organizations who care about and have some similar values, but can help support what your theater community needs, and creating those partnerships, not expecting individuals just to do it on their own, but you as organizations helping lead the way to developing those partnerships.
That's great. Can we move to Michael Robertson real quick?
Hi, Michael Robertson from the Water Play Development Center. I think actually thinking about knowing all of the needs and sort of being able to look at that at once is really key. And I know that there are organizations like Creative Capital who are creating various kinds of training and entrepreneurial programs. We've, at the LARC, with our partners at Playwrights of New York, PONY, have created a financial boot camp for playwrights. We piloted it last year. I'm super excited about this. It's free to the playwrights. It's a 2-day workshop. It has follow-up reunions. We bring them back. It's not free if you live out of town because we can't get paid to bring people in, but it is free if you can get here, if you live in town. And we've created it so that it's a long-term commitment to them. We're creating a B curriculum that has specialty classes. So outside of financial boot camp, which is basic budgeting, looking at your life. So we have a consultant that will talk to you individually. We'll decide if you want to do this program. I can slot for you in May if you want to. We'll talk about travel. But it is really looking holistically at the person. It's not just how much am I making off of my commissions. Money is hard to talk about if you don't have any. If you do not come from money, it is very hard to talk about. And if you're in a career that you've chosen where there isn't money, there is shame. There's a lot of shame about talking about money, and I think that what we discovered in the financial boot camp is the 12 people, we do it 12 at a time, they together talk about things beyond how do I make my budget. They talk about what does it mean to actually be a parent in the theater. Can I get married? can I buy a house ever in my life? So it's an amazing community that I hope we're starting a little bit of a micro movement of empowerment through finance, through our program. And we're not the only people doing this, but I would encourage you, if it's within your resources, to add it to a grant to do it. It's not an expensive program. I'm happy to share our model. And we're continuing to improve that this year. So we're expanding it beyond finances to actually create specialty classes. So we just did a self-marketing class. We're doing a negotiation class. We did a how do you actually just get your taxes done and find healthcare in this crazy marketplace class. And it's wildly successful. We don't have enough slots for everybody who wants it, but I think that there's an idea, and this isn't teaching playwrights because they don't know anything. This is actually, if you're interested and here's the curriculum, you have something to share, and we populate the room with people who are doing really well according to them and people who, according to themselves, are not doing so well. So the learning that happens across generation and across the economic spectrum within that room is really kind of amazing. So again, I think this is a really inexpensive way to help empower our artists to really take charge of the parts of their lives that they can. I think Vicki is really right. You have to worry about the things that you can change, and I think that there are things that you don't learn in grad school about how to run your life as an artist that need to be taught in that arena, and some schools are, but very few are, that I think that if you regularly serve a group of artists and can find some way to help empower them by bringing them together around these scary issues that just bring up all of these emotional things with us, right, and so sticky. So I'm going on and on because I'm clearly emotional about this. I think it's the beginning of something that puts writers and other artists and their collaborators in the driver's seat rather than waiting for the car to drive up and pick them up. Do you know what I mean? It's too, they can't just be waiting for the ride. Right? Some people don't have a car. Some people don't even know where the bus stop is. Right? In some cases, there's no buses. Right? So I just encourage you to think. I think there are simple ways to help create an empowerment movement within a disempowered group of people.
I see a lot of action over our first responders, and I think I'm going to start with Victor. You guys decide.
If any of you followed me on Twitter a few years ago, and I don't even know what Twitter's really about, it was Squinter. That was my handle. Because I realized I'm a relatively smart guy. These are very smart people. You're all very smart. But if you're in theater, sometimes you have to squint, right? Because these are real realities. We were talking about equity for a while, actors' equity. I was at a function with SDC, the stage directors, choreographers, and my rep said to me, Victor Maog, you do really interesting work. You're doing really well. And I thought to myself, whoever's under me on this list is doing horribly. So I'm just going to share with you a couple of facts and figures, just so you know that I'm always into, I grew up Catholic, and so I have a Pollyanna-ish way about the world sometimes. But what I've been trying to do in my own way of life is to go, here are the facts. How do we deal with that stuff? So the Asian American Performer Actors Coalition did a study. Maybe some of you know this already, and if you do, here are the numbers again, they've been updated. But they did a survey of actors of color working in major off-Broadway and Broadway houses. So I'm just going to share these numbers with you, and they're just the numbers, okay? Numbers, as you know, with budgeting, reveal what counts, or maybe not. So in the years between 06 and 11, 79% of the actors cast Broadway and off-Broadway, 80% Caucasian. 13% were African American, 4% were Latino, 2% Asian, and 1% other. So, plus pension, plus benefits, 1% other. So it went down, I think, in around, it went up for Asian Americans. I'm going to talk about Asian Americans just because I run a small theater company. It went up to 3% in 06, and then it went down to 1%, I think, around 1%. Numbers got better, right? I'm a pretty hopeful person, 11, 12. Everyone get ready. 79% Caucasian, 14% African American, 3% Latino, 3% Asian American, 1% other, that's plus pension income. So those are the facts. And one of the great things about the Spark program is because it lets me understand that many of you have helped me out. Many of you have taken me to dinner, many of you have introduced me to other folks. I'm not coming here saying that I've had the hardest life ever, but I just want to remind you about those numbers. Many of you introduced me to executives for search committees. I'm not going to deny that I don't understand the secret Chinese restaurant meeting or the parking lot meeting. I benefited from some of that. So I guess all I'm asking you to say, in whatever communities you're in, is to know some of this information and to use it for whatever it is, because you have this information now to be able to make these choices. And so I would say for your communities, if you're going to have a sort of a meeting, that private meeting at that club, or on that golf course, just talk about some of these things and see if you can just reveal some of these ideas forward. And like it's been done to me, I've been placed with executive coaches and executive search firms and found different avenues of income. And maybe that's not for everybody, but maybe you'll keep an eye out for that, because these numbers are not, they are just what they are.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Ben, I see your...
Yeah, I just very quickly, I want to, in the spirit of reframing the questions where we started, for me the question is less about how we retain artists than how we think about investing more deeply in a vibrant, equitable cadre of artists in this country. And the reason I'm making that distinction is, if you're following trends, we're giving 120,000 degrees in the arts every year in this country. We already have unions that are grossly, the bulk of the membership is unemployed. It's not about retention of this as much as it is about deep investment and being thoughtful about how we serve and help transition and make resources available to people that may not be able to continue in their dreams of being an artist. That's a different question. For the theater field, I would just say two things. Number one, Joe Patton, everybody still talks about, one of the transformative things that he did as a producer was when he had a playwright in rehearsal, before the show opened, he'd already commissioned the next play. And just that security of the long-term interest was transformative for people. The other thing, just attitudinally, I would observe, is that in an age where we're increasingly interdisciplinary, in which there are increasingly porous opportunities, the attitudes we've sometimes had as a field that it's a terrible thing if we lose a playwright to television and film is maybe now for the future a cause for celebration, that there's a porous nature, that an artist can find a reasonable life by operating in film and television and come back, and go in and come back. And porousness is about celebration rather than disciplined walls, which many of us were thinking in silo terms growing up, frankly.
And just comment on that, which is that porousness extends not only to which aspect of the arts you're working in, but how you're taking your arts and bringing it to the community as a whole. So much of the most gratifying work that we've seen people do is not just what they're doing on the stage in a traditional theater, but how they're using those skills in schools, how they're using them with the elderly, how they're using them in their community for political action. So again, it's helping the individuals who have these talents and who are using these skills function in all of these different realms, and how that can allow them to create greater stability in their own life.
Okay, great, thank you. Tim, do you want to say?
Yeah, no, I was following up a little bit on Ben, actually, although I was thinking the same thing, which is how do we rethink some of the things about the model of like a resident artist? I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, as ACA was sort of becoming a thought process, one of the things that occurred to me was, if I just paid somebody's health care each year, rather than paying them a salary or necessarily commissioning them, does that actually give them the opportunity to focus on their artwork because they don't have to go trying to make that extra $5K on something else, right? And I mean, really, $4,000 to $5,000 pays for health plan. So, in a simple way, could everybody in the TCG universe start taking on resident artists in a different kind of model of what residency means? That you're supporting their career moving forward, for some aspect of their life, not necessarily the commission of the work, although that might be with playwrights what you do, or with a musician, it might be a composition of, it's a little bit about investing in the long term, right? And so, and especially in a community where we're looking for more diversity and inclusion, this is a great way to keep people sustained in that and not let them drift into another space. So.
Right, and just specifically what's happening at Two River right now, we actually have a residence opportunity. There are several condominiums going up around the theater right now, and they are now looking on their own into artist residencies in their own buildings. And for us, that's a conversation that was never open before, that they are proactively looking for places to have artists there and to have a gallery on the first floor. And they come to the theater now and they're asking, what can we do and how can we engage more artists in this community? And this is a residential real estate property, and that's a conversation I've never had at this point. And now we're looking for how can we actually support this and bringing artists not just to our theater but to our town. And I feel like there's a big divide there when we think that their plays go on stage and their words shouldn't go into the community. So actually taking up residence and opening and expanding that idea is really important. And now we have a sort of unlikely partner right now. And so maybe that other, there are other corporations and organizations out there who would think about supporting their artists a little bit more, especially when it comes to basics like having a roof over their head and having the theater advocate for a new kind of lifestyle.
And can I just add, for those of you that are interested in this topic, Art Space, which is an organization in Minneapolis, for 20, 30 or more years has specialized in using tax incremental financing to build work and live space for artists, that then the ownership goes to the artists. So if you're interested in that topic, check out Art Space in Minneapolis. They're fantastic.
When Bob Falls became artistic director of Goodman, he wanted to create a group of artists around him who were retained by the Goodman as artists, not an artist who is also casting director or an artist who is also literary manager, but people who were paid to be artists. And we were helped in that endeavor because at that time there were programs that were trying to connect artists with companies to create artistic homes for artists. Over 30 years, it's grown now to include 8 people. They are all paid a living wage. They do not have administrative or artistic responsibilities other than to be artists and to be spokespeople and advocates for the theater. They're not bound to work only at the Goodman, but the Goodman is their artistic home, and we're sort of buying the option on their best ideas, so to speak. There are artists. Bob is very generous, and he wanted people around him whose work he didn't necessarily understand or wasn't necessarily familiar with. And so this group is made up of 6 directors, 2 writers, and 1 actor. And 6 of the people are individuals of color, and 5 of them are women. And a number of them have aesthetic backgrounds that, again, Bob believes in them, but in terms of what they want to do, he's like, okay, well, you want to do it, and I believe in you. I have no idea what you're trying to do, but we'll support it. I can only say that this model has been incredibly successful and has enabled the theater to connect with our community in ways that we could never have imagined 30, 40 years ago. Most importantly, it's created great work on a consistent basis and very, very different work from month to month. So I think ultimately, those of us who are trustees, those of us who are executive and managing directors of these theaters, really have a very simple responsibility. And no, you can't go out and hire 9 artists at once. But you can hire an artist and pay them a living wage and bring them in as an artist. And you know what? You'll find things to do, and they will become advocates for you so that it's not on a transactional basis. We're not bringing you in to commission you to do a play. We're bringing you in as an artist who we want this to be your artistic home. I mean, every theater, and there are a lot of ensemble theaters already, and there are theaters who have this kind of model. But for the theaters who don't, if every theater who didn't have that kind of model and really brought an immature freelance artist into their circle, it would change the American theater overnight.
Yes, it would. Okay, thank you, Rock. We have time for two more quick ones. Woody and then Amelia.
Just to put a little more meat to the facts, when we surveyed in the State of the Artist in 2011, we included directors, designers, playwrights, actors, as well as dramaturgs. What we found was the median salary was $39,600. However, a quarter of the people that we surveyed had incomes of $25,000 or less. So that's a little bit of a reality check. When we did a panel talking about some of these survey results, I clearly remember Chris Diaz, the playwright who did Chad Deity, was on the panel, and he had said, listen, 25,000 is a great year. That is nowhere near my average salary. So a little bit of reality check.
Thanks, Amelia. Woody?
Woody King Federal Theater. We have 46 years, and our mission is to integrate women and minorities into the American theater. And for all those years, I think we've done that. And these young people come through from colleges and universities, and it's like a pass-through theater. Recently, Equity is really more concerned with their senior members, and those senior members need 2 or 3 more weeks to get unemployment. They need their pension, they need their welfare. And they are not too concerned about these young people who just graduated from universities across America, especially historically black universities where they had no opportunities. And therefore, a lot of them who come into New York or go into Los Angeles, in terms of theater, we are one of the few that provided that for all those years. And you can look at our theaters like a who's who came through as young artists, and so I broke through, And Equity, latest position to us is we are concerned about our seniors. We're concerned more about the pension and welfare of these senior actors. And therefore, we realize that our place selection must differ, and in differing, it changes the theater. It's sort of like a conundrum. And I would like to address ladies from Equity.
I'm not Equity, I'm Actors Fund. We
Actors
work
Fund.
closely with Equity, but we're the nonprofit human service organization, not the union.
Okay, but we were talking about individual artists.
Right.
So it changes the expectations of the young artists who come into New York now, especially African American, Asians, and Hispanics, and have really no outlet.
Thanks so much, Woody. That was a great conversation. We need to move on to the next condition, even though I know that there's probably more to be said on this topic, much more to be said. We're going to move on to our final condition, which is succession and equity. And here's our question. As more theaters transition from founder-led organizations to second, third, and even fourth generation leadership, what are the best ways to manage succession? And how does this question connect with our desire to see even greater gender parity and racial equity at the leadership level of our theaters? Susie Medak is going to help us get started with this conversation.
Woo!
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to clean up on one item that we somehow missed saying during the foundation and fundraising discussion, etc. Just give me 1 second. Which is, it was so odd that it didn't come up. Well, we're talking about the decline in arts funding from foundations. What we did talk about is the decline in general operating funding
It's something, it's on all of our minds, and I just, for those of you, if there's anybody in this room who has a family foundation or a private foundation, please look at Vicki Reiss, applaud Vicki Reiss, honor Vicki Reiss, because she can only make a foundation that continues to build your operating support. Having said that. I was asked to talk a little bit about succession. There was, at the beginning of every succession discussion always starts with the concern that we now are losing a generation of founders. And I've realized that I've now heard that for 40 years. I don't know, I keep being surprised by it, and I don't know why we keep feeling like we don't know how to do this. So I just want to say this is, you know, it's something we're actually very good at. Look at how many of our organizations are second, third, and fourth generation. So get over it. About 16 years ago, Berkeley Rec was going through, Susie Maog, I'm the managing director of Berkeley Repertoire Theater. I think I was supposed to say that at the beginning. We were going through a transition from our second to a third artistic director. We actually had in-house an associate artistic director who was told we were going to do a national search, that we were going to, we could assure him that we would not look at anybody who had lesser qualifications than he did, but that we actually were going to look around the field. As our search leader said, our board member who was leading the search, he said, this is your job to lose. And midway through the process, he said, actually, Tony, this is now your job to win. We have great candidates out there. And ultimately, many of you know, Tony DeConi actually was hired. But the process of going through the search, made Tony a very different, not only candidate, but I would say a very different artistic director. The process of going through that search made our board a much more discerning board than they would have been had we simply hired Tony. So having said that, there's a couple of things I'd like to put on the table in terms of what I see as being the conundrum. I look around and I see a lot of small companies, particularly a lot of ensemble companies, companies that were started by groups of people who are going through transitions. And what I see that concerns me is that how many times the decision is made to promote from within, to preserve the culture of the organization. There are many large organizations that I watch that because of either their complexity administratively or their deep commitment to a legacy tend to promote from within. And as I think about how are we going to change this field, how are we going to create opportunities for people of color, how are we going to create opportunities for women, how are we going to create opportunities for people who have historically not been perceived as being strong candidates for any of these organizations? How are we going to create opportunities for them if we continue to let legacy and complexity trump new voices? To create the opportunity, how are we going to create opportunities for new voices to be able to recreate our organizations? And so the questions that I would raise would be, that I'd ask us maybe to explore, or maybe they'll trigger some thinking, would be what are the things that we should be doing differently in this field to be training a new generation of people who are inevitabilities for these jobs as they emerge, where they are so well trained, they are so skilled, they are so ready, that there is no argument against hiring them, because frankly, there has always been an argument against hiring them. They don't have experience at the board, they don't have experience supervising staff, they don't, whatever. And so how do we create opportunities to train a generation of people who are inevitabilities for these jobs? I think the second question that we have to ask ourselves is, how much do we value stability over creative disruption? Are we willing to tolerate the kind of disruption that is essential to recreation? And so I guess, I don't know, that's it.
First responders.
Well, at the risk of putting an idea into people's heads in this audience, my perspective on this is inevitably colored by the fact that my mentor, who brought me into the theater field and trained me for many years, actually was killed suddenly when he was run over by a car driven by one of his own board members. So please don't follow that as an advice for those of you on the board. But what that made me appreciate, to Susie's question, this is Tom Haas from Indiana, and it wasn't deliberate, it's a whole other side. But what this has made me appreciate in two senses is, number one, the day to begin succession planning is the day the new person arrives. Because if you wait until the outgoing person has made that declaration, and what I see a lot of search firms doing is saying, oh, you have a vacancy, or oh, now you're going to, now you need to sit down and figure out what matters to the company. Now you need to sit down and figure out your values. That should be crystal clear from day one and revisited annually, just like you revisit your mission and the other things you revisit. This constant testing of what we exist to do is not something you do only when the leadership arises. The other thing that I've always been really, to Susie's questions, that I've always been really struck by, I thought Peter Coleman did a really interesting thing when there was a vacancy and he was running center stage. He spent a year, again, bringing in people who did it differently. When he said, let's bring in leaders at other theaters who operate in an entirely different way. If we're serious about this, board meetings, we should periodically bring in people who don't do it like we do it. So that, again, the board's natural default inclination is to look for the second Linda Hartzell, to use an example here up front. There will not be another Linda Hartzell. Linda Hartzell is one of the great people in our field forever. There will be nobody that will be able to do what she's done. But keeping alive a vision of how differently it's done, at the same time we're clearing the values, is key. And third and finally, if we're serious about the issues about equity, is it the Rooney, is that what's called the Rooney Rule in NFL, where we just won't replace the coach without interviewing a person of color for that job? If we're serious about it as an industry, let's adopt the Rooney Rule. I mean, just as a first start, because there are a lot of searches where you get down to the short list and there's like, oh, well, there are no candidates of color, there are no women. Let's be serious, let's declare the Rooney Rule in the field.
You know what, Ben? It would give a guy like me practice, right? So a few years ago, and I was telling Teresa the story last night, a few years ago, a large commercial venture reached out to me. And I said, how am I even qualified for this? They're like, just add zeros. And so I went from like a list of 20 to like the top 8 worldwide. And I didn't get it. But this decision maker said to me, I took this away from HR because they weren't going to be radical. They weren't going to do this thing that needed to happen with this large corporation. And so he called me, sadly, from another country, and he said, Victor, sorry you didn't, it's really hard to get in here. The top 3 candidates are all internal. They've all worked with $50, $100, $150 million budgets. But for me to even have that process is mind-blowing. Suddenly I wanted to roar with the lions, and it was a real gift. So if the Rooney Rule existed, I would at least have more practice. I get to know you. We have some lunch, where we tell some jokes, and we talk about how we can make some slight shifts, 1% to 10% or whatever.
Thank you. Snehal, did you want to jump in?
Yes, my name is Snehal Desai. I'm with East West Players in Los Angeles and a Spark Fellow. There's been a lot of data and information, and it's been great and I think very eye-opening. I just want to bring your attention to this line, 19% have a written policy related to staff and board diversity. To me, that means only 19% of our theaters have a core value of diversity in their agenda. Because until you write it down, it doesn't count, and it won't happen. And to me, that is a very eye-opening figure, because every theater on every level needs diversity in some way. I'm in a theater of color, and we need more women. We need more people under 35. We need more socioeconomic diversity. And that's not a hard thing to change. So I just want to say to this room now, the next time these facts come up, can this number be at 90%, please?
Jumping back to Kelvin here.
So I have a lot of feelings about this right now, and I'm just going to be honest with you as one of the people who received one of the 120,000 degrees in the arts this year, actually last month. So to have done the work, to have been schooled, and to have gone through these programs and met with leaders and still be intimidated by this field is unacceptable. to be able to look around the room and not see people who look like me
Yes.
in the ultimate positions of power, which are board chairmen, not just executive directors and artistic directors, it's hard. Because as we're talking about in Spark this year, right now, it's that I fear that going on a job interview and looking around the room, that not only will people see my race, they will also see my age and discriminate and have ideas about that. And it makes me insecure as a leader, who's put in the time and the work and the learning knowledge, and all I'm seeking is an opportunity. So you have to look at how your institutions are inviting that discussion. Are you having that discussion? Do people of color and do people of different abilities, do people of different ages know that you are focusing on this as a priority within your organization? What we do is for the greater good. And that's, or what I do. I don't want to presume everything for everyone. What I do and why I'm in theater is for the greater good. And so I look at the community and I want to understand why we don't look like the world, why we don't look like the people we keep saying that we want to attract. You know, if I hear it again, I might explode that to hear someone say we need more young people in the theater. How inviting is your theater to young people right now? To mothers, to expecting mothers and parents, and looking at this field and understanding that if you want to welcome the kind of people that you're looking for, you have to display it, you have to own it, you have to do the 90%, you do have to write it down. And it's something that I as a leader, even with my qualifications and the classes I've taken, still don't feel secure enough to say I would get a fair shot anywhere. And there are people who will approach you and who will say that we are doing this work, but if you don't see it, how can you tell?
Thank you so much.
I hadn't wanted to take up any more than my fair share at the first part, so I'm wearing a different hat now. First of all, if you're like me and you take notes during these meetings, you go back and go, we should try this. I just want to, because Lord did a lot of work on, we discussed whether the Rooney Rule was something that should be adopted within our association, and we actually decided against the Rooney Rule, in part because there were very serious legal concerns about it that many of our employment lawyers raised. So I just, if you've written down, go and do the Rooney Rule, there's a lot of different ways that you can have the same effect as the Rooney Rule, but be sure you checked with an employment lawyer. So I just wanted that to be on the table. The second thing, though, is that I did want to say that within LORT, we actually have made a commitment to, in all of our top leadership searches, having a qualified pool of candidates that does include women and people of color. And because one of the things that we discovered, and I think it's been said in different ways, is that by being given the opportunity to interview, you become a better candidate. And at the same time, we're hoping that by putting more people of color, more women in front of our boards, that our boards will actually begin to recognize that leadership can come in a lot of different sizes and shapes, because that we know is part of the challenge.
Thank you. Oh no, who is that?
I'm not used to this. I'm Vicki. I'm presently head of theater management at Cal State Long Beach, and we have one of only 2 MBA, MFA combined theater management programs in the country. And we maintain a cohort of 12 students every year. And that is a 3-year program, so we have 4 first years, 4 second years, and 4 third years. They study together, and Ken Novice actually created the program, so he knows it very well. One of the challenges that we face right now in our cohort is we have 1 student of color who is a woman. She fulfills 2 obligations, and she also happens to have Native American in her, so we call her our entire package of diversity. We have the conversation all the time about where are the applicants who don't look like me, who don't look like Ken. Those are the people who are coming to our program, and I know Yale on occasion has a greater, deeper pool of applicants, but I would encourage all of you, and coming from the field, myself as well, to, if you know students, or if you know the Kelvins, or if you know people who are considering pursuing education, or considering going into something else that will deepen their experiences, enrich their skill set, please, please send them to schools and to programs and to MBAs and MFAs and accreditation programs, because we wonder where they all are. We're not seeing them. So we can't churn them into the field, and we can't bring about diversity in the field if we can't get them into our doors to get to your doors.
Nikki, is your program free?
Our program is a state school in California, and
I
we
just want to point out
heavily
economic barrier that brings them.
Mhm.
You know, there's a key. Okay.
Yeah, and also our undergraduate acting programs are heavily enrolled with students of color, because Cal State, the whole Cal State system is primarily, or it's a slight majority of students who are first-time college students and who are the children of immigrants. So our undergraduate base is clearly diversified, but we have no one coming through the graduate program. And I hear this at other graduate schools as well. So I would encourage you, if you know people who are thinking about it, don't let, I mean, you make an excellent point, Michael, but don't let finances be the thing that stops someone from approaching us. We will help those students who are qualified come to our program, and we will train them, and they will come out, and they will go work at your theaters. So please, if you know them, send them everywhere.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Those of you who want to come to the mic, I just want to remind you that there are mics around the room. We have a lineup over here.
Okay. So Susie? Yes. Susie, hi. So I appreciate so much of what you had to say. It was interesting, I think, the way you look at it. One of the things that I want to just challenge is this idea that that we need to be trained up. This idea that we need to kind of be overtrained, so that by the time we get in front of them, there's no excuse. I get the rationale. I totally do. It's hard to be a man who's been in theater for 25, 26, 27 years, knowing that, a cat that's, been around for 3 or 4 years gets an associate artistic directorship. Who's white. So when you hear those words, they don't mean anything to me. Actually, when I hear that, I go that makes absolutely no sense, right? Because in that world, I was qualified 15 years ago to run the damn thing, right? Because half the motherfuckers that were started or were running and they don't know the hell they were doing either. They learned from somebody, they learned while it was happening, right? And it's being allowed that birth to be able to kind of go all right, I'm gonna step in, because all of a sudden, you have and you'll see it, right? You see an advertisement for a social artistic directorship or something like that, and then you go and we do our research. What? Well, we got okay. So what did the other person do, and what was that story? And so you see what the thing is, and they go oh, we want 10 years of experience managing such and such and producing and whatever. And you look at when it was first. The person who had the job had 2 years. They were or maybe right out of college. It's happened. And it's oh. And that's just more of how does that happen in any case? That's not even about equity. It's just that's just weird. But it does beg the question that if I went in there, not having the 10 years of that stuff, what the hell would how would that look like? What would that mean? How are you going to see me? How is your board going to see me when I walk into the door? And that's the thing. Diversity, inclusion, and equity. It has to be. It's scary. It's messy. And that, I did this thing with my board with Civic Ensemble, to get it into our bylaws about like a diversity thing, and that wasn't just enough to say like, okay, we'll do it. And it was the hardest discussion that we've ever had. I got 4 black folk on it, and they were freaked out about it. And I had to stand in and just keep saying, it's not enough, it's not enough, it's not enough. And that shit gets internalized. It gets internalized. You're like, well, we can't do it. We got like, you know, quotas, you don't want to do that. It's just not enough. You've got to be willing to be messy and be afraid. Be very afraid. You are in a really good place if you're afraid. It's okay. And I think that's what's not happening. And it's why when I walk in the room, that fear is paralyzing. So if there's a way that we can make that fear liberating as opposed to paralyzing, I don't know. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on something that Maog had pointed out. He talked about that line that jumped out at him, which is 19% having written policy related to staff and board diversity, which is also one of the lines that also leaked out at me. And I'm not quite sure how much of us really understand why that particular line was bold. And I think that part of it is when we think about the work that is required to transform an organization to be equitable, it is a tremendous amount of work. And although writing the words down becomes difficult, it is part of the easiest part of that work. It's just the beginning. Because you really have to recognize that the issue is systemic. And when you don't make a commitment to first start off with defining it and creating a map towards solving it, you sort of rely on individual personal attitudes. And you're not respecting the problem, the historical, systemic problem. And it does require a map out of it. It requires a structural replacement of the structural racism that's currently present. Some organizations are unfamiliar with that reality. It takes time to understand that we have structural barriers that permeate our society. And as organizations that exist within society, we're not immune. So once you begin to recognize that the issue is not you or you or you, but it's a structural legacy that we were born into, it requires systemic change. Similar to your bylaws that organize your organization, you need systemic changes that change the culture of your organization. So this 19% reflects who has just started the work. Because the real work happens way after you get it on paper. And it's long, it never ends, it's hurtful. It's a lot of sweat, blood, and tears. And if we haven't gotten to the first phase, it leaps out at us. And I'm thinking that we're here in this room with some shared values. Are we prepared as a cohort of colleagues, as members of the theater communications group, to make a collective decision that we're going to commit to the first and easiest step to achieve equity?
I want to talk about the executive search process again. I know Susie mentioned that Lord has a commitment to talking to women and people of color in the executive search process, but it's a commitment. It's a verbal commitment. It has no teeth, and it's only words. I would like to see a policy put in place maybe by our funders or maybe by the NEA, where we have to check a box when we apply for a grant that says, yes, in fact, when we have an executive search, we have interviewed, not just talked to, we have brought in a woman, we have brought in a person of color to meet with our board of directors. This is not a big burden on any of our institutions. These positions change once every 5 years, every 10 years, every 20 years, every 30 years. I think it's really important, and I would like to see something with teeth. I think it will make a big difference, because I think a lot of people, it's so easy to say, yes, we'll do this, and then it doesn't happen. So I hope somehow something can happen with rules and teeth.
Okay, great. I'd like to just pop over. I'm not sure who got up when, but I want to pop over to Madeline real quick and then come back over to. Okay, let's go Madeline and then Nelson. And
I'll go last.
Okay. All right.
Такова толкова визовка човек, сметаем Хитсов, Kyokuchi Chimokis. Hi, my name is Madeline. I'm President Artistic Director of American Indian Arts Inc. here in the city, and I just want to introduce myself first in my language because it's a language from here. And just draw attention to the fact that in addition to, sorry, I'm not going to speak. In addition to the issue that you raised when you walk into a room and you don't see anyone who looks like you, that's also an issue in universities, and that's a big problem of why you don't go into those programs, is that when I thought about going back to school a few different times, I knew what my experience had been so far and the level of isolation attached to that, right? And so when you go into a room and you interview for something and the first thing they put on you is, oh, you don't look native, how many more times do you want to go into a room where the first thing you're going into is being attacked for who you are and what people expect from you, right? And so I just want to bring up the sensitivity to the fact that different people can serve their communities in different ways. And for me, the more time I spend with my community and knowing what their needs are as an artistic community and what I can bring to them, the more powerful we become and the more empowered our voices become. Whereas the more time I spend necessarily in a structure that is not indigenous, that is not from here, it actually warps the art and makes it less powerful. And so there are different structures and different tools that we have that aren't all the same. And that should be considered, I think, in looking at these issues. Thank you.
Nelson?
Sure.
And these are our last four questions here, and I do want to go back to Ben real quick because I know he has something he wanted to add.
Great. Hi, I'm Nelson Eusebio, another sparkler, freelancer. I just wanted to address a couple of things really quickly. You know, we talk about these ideas and core values and the idea of training leaders, and that's part of what the Spark program is about. And within our own communities, even though I'm a freelancer, I've served as an artistic director for several different small companies. And what eventually sort of happens and where I think we all sort of struggle is that we say that diversity is a core value. We say that we want diversity. We try and come up with action plans. One of the things that was, we had the Spark people had a brief conversation with some board members, and one of them articulated the point that we say we want change, but then we're terrified of it. Human beings are by their nature loss averse. The idea that we're going to lose our culture, we're going to lose something. The idea, I think, that is most interesting is there's an opportunity, not just lost, but an opportunity to be gained by having a greater sense of diversity. I understand that we try and preserve our cultures institutionally, and that is important, and it means a tremendous amount. I spent some time at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and when they say this is company, that means a certain specific thing to them that is exciting, and it's in the DNA of the place. But when you're looking at new leaders who don't look, quite frankly, like anyone on the board, like anyone else, like Victor, like Godfrey, like myself, believe that we're not here just, and this is to tie it back to Che and the people who I had a session earlier. The next step 5 years from now, 10 years from now, leadership is going to look like us. Your boards are going to look like us. It's not an us, and the key here is shifting it from us, the people of color, and you, the stakeholders, to we. We are all in this field together. We're here to help transform it. And by transform it, it's not to make or take from you, but to enrich it all together. We keep talking about theater being broken, and I love what a couple years ago Joe Hodge said, if theater's dying, it's dying the slowest death ever. There are more people coming out with degrees. There are more artists entering the field. There are more ways we tell stories. We're not just actors and directors, we're filmmakers, and we're YouTube performance artists, and all these different kinds of things. There is room in your institutions for all of those things, whether you assign resources to them or not. But just know that when you look for a new leader, it's not changing, that's not just preserving the DNA that you have, but it's the next generation. It's transforming that DNA into something new and something amazing. And that kind of growth is forever what this field has been built on. So it's coming, folks.
Hi, I'm Paula Tomline, the Managing Director of South Coast Repertory, and in the unique position of transitioning two founding artistic directors to a structure where it's the co-leadership model of an artistic director, managing director. We're now in our 4th year of transition, and our succession planning began approximately 4 years before we started the process. So, to reinforce Ben's point, I guess I just want to share a couple of things I've learned through the process, and I continue to learn. And the fact that this process, it needs to be organic to whatever your specific theater is and culture is, because one size does not fit all on succession, as opposed to maybe some corporate models that are easier to navigate, perhaps, I don't know. But in our case, certainly a very organic situation brought us to the conversation early. And what made it possible to have the conversation was the artistic leadership, who said, we want to have this conversation. It was quite easy to go into the conversation, to talk about the plan, and as Ben said, do it before it was an emergency. To encourage the conversation in advance is just far easier in the long run than to wait for the inevitable conversation, which is much more difficult. The idea that this obviously has huge emotional issues attached. The intellectual process is one thing, and the emotional absorption of the process is a completely different one. And the thing that I think I learned the most is, aside from the board, who really had to absorb the concept on their own for a while before they got into it, the staff, very invested, and the community, clearly, knows a certain set of, and understands a certain set of behaviors that are going to change. And so to bring them along with you, if you can, in the conversation, whatever that means to you, whether it's communicating with them through, writing, or bringing them in to talk and get the stakeholder view in advance, is very valuable and actually strengthens the continuity as you go into identifying a new leader, wherever that is. And diversity is a big part of that conversation because it's integrated into the conversation with whoever is on your succession planning team. And finally, the search team, when that happens, which is I'm not really going to address. So I guess the idea that stability is, you have to upend that in some way to get creative change. I don't know, I think there's an element of that you need to be able to embrace change, however that comes about, and embrace new ideas and allow it. Maybe there's some instability, but we've had, I think, success in understanding that there will be change, letting people in on that process soon enough so that they weren't surprised by it, and finally then implementing change, and it doesn't feel so challenging. You know, it is change. There's a lot of change going on. Our situation is, and what we say is, it's evolutionary, not revolutionary. And that has served us well so far. I'm sure there'll be other changes in the next, the next time this happens, and certainly there's a lot of questions to be asked still about how it's all working. But ultimately, if you stick with your core values through the whole conversation, and they sort of guide you, you're clear on what those are, it really does come through in the end, all throughout the process and in the integration of the transition to the next leadership.
But change is revolutionary.
Change is revolutionary.
Not evolutionary, it's
well,
revolutionary.
It can be, with both. In our case, what I mean by that is, there's a time frame. I mean, I don't know what people's time frames are. Ben brought it up. I mean, if you're in the crisis mode where all of a sudden somebody steps out, and then you're faced with, oh my God, we haven't ever talked about what we would do if this happened, or we always said if somebody, God forbid, got hit by something.
Diversity has been a conversation in America for the last 25 years.
Say that, I'm sorry.
Diversity, inclusion, been a conversation in the American theater for the last 15 or 20 years. So it's not, the evolution has long been a part of our conversation. Yeah. So it's revolutionary now.
Thank you, Woody. Thank you. Thank you, Paula. And we'll hear from Susie, and then we're going to hear from Ben, and Sam gets the last word.
Hi, I'm Susie Scott, Board of Governors at Children's Theater Company, Minneapolis. The first thing I want to say is, and I shared this with Tim Jennings, our managing director, I really had hoped that the ratio of Board of Governors to actual staff was flip-flopped. The people who need this are people like myself, my colleagues, people who sit at the table from corporations, people whose hearts are in the right place and certainly want to change that 19% statistic. But I wouldn't let that statistic demoralize us, because I think if we were to take a show of hands right now, everyone's hand would go in the air about wanting to support that. I think the issue is, one, as someone had pointed out earlier, there's legal issues tied to that. And you certainly don't want to jeopardize your standing as an organization and add more work to the table and hire pro bono attorneys to work the mess out. But what I do want to say is, the hiring committee, when and if there obviously needs to be a succession plan, but when and if there needs to be a new artistic director or managing director, the beauty of that is that hiring committee is your board of governors. And it's important for me to go back and to let my colleagues know what it means to be an ambassador. So it's not just about development and revenue and funding, it's what do I do on days where they need me to lobby for issues? Who are the connections I have? What money trees can I shake, but also what political trees can I shake to make that 19% statistic change in theory, which is not in theory, but in practice, which is more important than writing it down. And so for me, again, if we were to take a show of hands, I think everyone here would support that. I think what we need to do is move the Board of Governors, or people who are not here as staff, but as volunteers, to go back and be ambassadors and to let your fellow colleagues know what they can do to support that. And that's where the uncomfortable discussion happens, because in jobs like mine, it's not culturally okay to have those conversations like the way we are here today. It's not safe, it's not okay, and it's not professional, and it's sad, but it's the truth. Which is why when you get a 50-plus board of very high-level executives coming together to have this conversation, it's done in a very diplomatic fashion. And it's not just about color, it's about gay and lesbian issues. You can see the posture stiffen up at meetings when those things are brought up. These are things that are entwined into our mission and our value statement, and yet it's a very difficult conversation to have on that side of this governing process. So I also challenged TCG to find ways to see if we can recruit more Board of Governors to attend this conference versus the other way around. I feel like in a lot of ways we're preaching to the choir. All of you have the knowledge, resources, and the passion to make these things change. But board really, and the desire is there to become educated.
Thank you, Susie. We're down.
Just very quickly, we're seeing a different kind of progress in this terrain made between organizations who have a job opening and post the job opening based on what the departing person has been doing, versus the organization who says, we have an opening. How can we use this opening as an opportunity to expand our core cultural competencies? And what that means is we're not going to look for the next person to do exactly what the prior person did. We're going to take a holistic audit of the unit or the team and see where we're short. And what this may mean is the existing staff may need to change their jobs. Some people are going to shed some things they've been doing. They're going to have to pick up some things they weren't doing before. But that opportunity to think holistically about every opening at every level being an opportunity to extend the organization's broadest competencies then reframes this movement in a way that really makes this whole issue progress much more tangible and concrete.
Thanks a lot. Sam, you got the last
one. Awesome. Keep this short and sweet. I just really appreciate the conversation and all of those that stuck around to listen. And it's really wonderful, one, to be in a space where people feel like they can give voice to their true heartfelt concerns. And that means that this is a special place. And I don't want to repeat what everyone said, but it's just this thing Sharif said about systemic change. And it really starts with that in our systems and the way that we think and the way that we continue to think, or instead of just think, that we are thinking. And, okay, I'm just going to say it. So, number one is I really hate that people are talking about interviewing women and people of color or transgender or whatever as a burden. That's really frustrating. It feels like people are talking about it like it might be a burden. And it just made me switch that thought process and like, this is kind of cool that we're going to be meeting people that we might not have ever met. And that's a good thing. Two is that like, we are not like trends, okay? Like, and I'm talking about myself as a black man, as a person of color. Like, don't do it just so you can say that you did it. That's not fair either. So really think about like the investment. What are you actually doing? What are you actually trying to do? Like, don't be like, oh, we interviewed a black guy, so hey, we made that, we crossed that line, right? So please don't do that. And then, I'm sorry. And if it's not your thing, which is understandable, I feel like we're preaching to the choir, right? I mean, all of these people, most of these people are thinking about these things. Some of you are finding about it today. But if it's not your thing, find somebody whose it is and bring them on your team so that they can think deeply about it, so that you can then just try and find out, learn, and educate yourself. It's not always on you, and you don't always have to figure it out. Changing yourself is hard, I get that, it takes time, but there might be somebody that's sitting right next to you that's like, no, I kind of know this thing, and I can kind of do this thing as long as you give me permission. So, you know, that might just be a better way and a faster way to move that number from 19 to 40, 50, 60, 100%. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
That was very clear. All right, thanks everyone. Thank you so much. It's really cold in this room and I'm like shivering, but there's a lot of heat around these issues, and I feel as if the conditions are so big that we could probably have spent this whole entire time just talking about one of them. But I want to thank you for your thinking, and for everyone like speaking from your minds and your hearts on every single one of these issues that we brought up. Special thanks to our amazing lineup of first responders. And to our condition prompters. Applause. I also want to, I know we're a little bit over time here. I have a few more remarks to make, but a very important thank you that I want to give out is to the entire TCG staff. Just so we can make sure that you really know who they are, I am going to name them. And I want to start now, and staff, if you happen to be in the room and I call your name, stand up, wave, whatever's easiest. Lori Baskin. Kevin Berkshire. You can hold your applause until we get to the end. I know we have planes to catch and all of that. Kevin Bitterman, Chloe Brown, Amelia Cachapero, Meredith Capel, Jen Cleary, Salome Migas, Catherine Gambaradella, Jackie Lawton, Ben Mandel, Rebecca Marzelak Kelly, Dafina McMillan, Kevin E. Moore, Sandy Nance, Alana Rose, Robin Schlinger, Gus Schulenberg, Kathy Soba, Meredith Suttles, Anna Troiano, and Allison Whitehall. Thank you all for your incredible work. Now just for a few last thoughts. When we started Friday night with Robert O'Hara and he said, cash and culture, I'm not going to talk about anything TCG told me to talk about. And I thought, uh-oh. And then he said, when I think of cash and culture, I think of old white men. And so tonight, I'm going to talk about old white men. And I thought, oh no. And there were some people who were actually observing that moment, and they told me later. But he then proceeded to talk about how his career trajectory was positively affected by old white men, and how he hopes to grow old with his partner, a white man. And I realized that what he'd done is what all great artists do. He created a space where something new was possible. He created a space where we could acknowledge the ongoing impacts of racism, sexism, and homophobia, all those walls that continue to divide us, and our capacity to take care of each other across those borders of identity. Both things are true, they don't contradict each other, but they do complicate each other. And usually, that's the case with those uh-oh, oh no moments. It means that things are more complicated than you thought. But it also means that more is possible. It means that we can make something new. And that's where we've been over these past few days, together, experiencing those uh-oh moments, acknowledging that things are more complex than they used to be, and reaching together towards something new. And we're reaching together, and when we're reaching together, we really are reaching together. When Tim Sanford read off a sample list of theaters that have worked with Robert O'Hara, a list that, by the way, was not even complete, because afterwards some people came up to me, and this was a very long list, and many of you were in the room. There were some other theaters, one of them was Jiva. Robert also worked there. It brought to light how deeply connected we are as a field, and how often it's these artists who connect us. We are an ecology, we're working together to nurture and develop talent, and all the individual decisions we make at our theaters come together over time to make a collective impact. So as we go now our separate ways, there are a few questions that are resonating with me that you might want to take home with you as well. I have a fiduciary question. How can we sustain our field when so many theaters are in the high-risk category of capitalization? I have a strategic question. How do we collectively develop an ecology of artists and leaders that is as inclusive and equitable as possible? And I have a big, messy, generative question. How do we prove Dutch Leonard wrong when he says the biggest challenge for nonprofit leadership is that mediocrity is survivable? The Berlin Wall fell 25 years ago. What are the walls we want to bring down today? And what are the walls that we want to build to create an American theater with room for everyone to call it home? We're so excited to keep chasing these questions with you and sharing what solutions we find along the way. And what I'm hoping as you leave the room today is that you will make a commitment to stay connected with us. And there are some very practical ways of doing that. Check out newamericantheater.org. Submit your own stories there. Join the National Council and the Trustee Leadership Network. And pull out your calendars and mark our next convenings, because we really want to see you there and continue the conversations we started here today. Audience Revolution is coming to Kansas City, March 25th to 27th. The National Conference will be in Cleveland from June 18th to 20th. And last but not least, our Fall Forum on Governance next November. So we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much for being here.